Good morning.
Morning.
Is the mic on? Sounds like it, yeah? How's everyone doing this morning?
Good.
I'm a very communal person. I like to understand what's happening in the audience and who's in the room. That's very important to me. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I'm really excited to share with you just a little bit of perspective around how we can connect character and ethics to diversity and leadership. And our topic this morning, pushing beyond the filtered mind and tainted heart. I was on a phone call yesterday, a conference call, with a group of educators from Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada. So I'm a part of a conference called the Youth Action Program, and this is my 5th year leading the group. And what we do is we bring students together from all over the United States, and we talk about race. We talk about privilege, we talk about identity, and we talk about ways that our students can celebrate who they are and, in the process, become global citizens. And in that process, while we were on the phone, we were looking at facilitators. So we're getting together applications, looking over the applications. There are about, I would say, 9 facilitators who've applied. And there was one young woman who stood out. And one of the contacts in Canada, in Toronto, raised a couple of points that I thought would be good to share. This particular candidate was extremely reflective about her identity, reflective about the experiences that she's had in life. And she was also extremely inquisitive. When you fill out an application, you typically don't ask questions. And so there were a couple of areas that she asked questions around how she can be more inquisitive as a facilitator, or even asking questions about the conference that she was interested in expanding on during our interview, after the application process. And this particular person also was extremely open to others. And I believe that that is the gateway, not only to diversity, but also to create more empathy, making sure that we're always open to each other. So there's this movie I used to watch as a child. It's called The Field of Dreams. Anyone seen that? If you build it, they will come. The first time I saw it, I was a little nervous. I'm like, what is this? They build it. If you build it, they will come. So in the movie, if you remember, the protagonist builds a baseball field in the middle of a cornfield, right? And everyone thinks that this person is out of their mind. But he listens to his psyche, he listens to the dreams, and he builds a baseball field. And so I encourage you all to think about the ways that you can build a mind of intention. How can you reframe your brain to be something that you never thought it could be? So building a mind of intention, it opens up the opportunity for action. So action will follow with intentionality. If you address it, it can change. There are so many things that go on in a school day, right? From helping students to make sure they don't get hit by a car while they're walking into the building, things that they bring into the conversation, whether it be politics, things around gender identity. And so the students, faculty, staff, administration are always trying to figure out how can we ensure that our students are smart and that they're good citizens. Part of that is making sure that we are addressing things as they come. And to do that, we must continuously address our minds in order to produce that action. The filtered brain. So think about your drive, your flight here. What was it like? What signs did you see? Did you notice the stoplights? Did you notice the words on the signs? Or you socialized to know what the signs already meant without seeing the signs? Did you think about the text messages that came in that you didn't answer while you were driving? Did you think about the weather, the clouds? The clouds were beautiful this morning on my way here. Peach, light blue, and a slice of pink, right? Did you think about all those things, or did you just notice it and keep going, right? Did you think about registration? What was at the table? I'm sure you noticed things at the table, right? Yeah? There were a couple flyers, a couple cards, you had to sign in, you got your name tag. All these things are happening all at once. And so our minds are created in a way where a lot of those things kind of get pushed out of our consciousness and into our subconsciousness. Our brain filters the things that need to go away for a moment so that we're in survival mode. And so I want to challenge you all to think about, how can you reframe how your mind is being filtered? William James, he was considered the father of psychology. He made a bold proposal about this function, which is the filtered brain theory. He said that the brain at the turn of the 19th century, that there are filters within our brain that give us access to vast consciousness, which extends beyond the limits of neutral activity. He proposed that the brain acts as a partial barrier and gives us only the surface of what's possible for us to perceive, So I want you all to watch this really quick video. If you've seen it, don't give it away. Please don't give it away. There will be some directives given to you, so just listen and follow the directions.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
I remember the first time I saw this, I was so upset that I did not catch the bear. Did you all catch the bear? A lot of you all didn't. Some people did. Okay. Kudos for you all who saw it. What's that?
I caught the bear, but I didn't count.
You caught the bear, but you didn't count. Cool. And so that's just an example of how our brains are framed, one, to do what we're told, right? And certain things we won't see based on how it's presented to us, right? So the tainted heart. Emotional intelligence is one of those, popular words, popular terms now. And I first learned about it while coaching a technology professional. She was a VP in a company, and we were talking about diversity. And she told me that she really wanted to talk about diversity and equity and inclusion with her team, but she was more interested in intelligence, emotional intelligence specifically. I said, well, I haven't studied that too much, so let me do my homework. And part of the process, she was basically talking about how her team she didn't feel like they had the emotional capacity to talk about issues of diversity, to talk about issues that were conflictual within her team. However, they had a very, very, very good relationship. So they had issues talking about things that were conflictual, specifically around identity, but they were really, really, really amazing teammates. And so even though we all are in this room as educators, just because we have good intentions, just because we come into the classroom, come into our administrative roles, and we want to make the best out of all of our students and provide all of the skills that they need to be successful in the world, there are some things that we miss. There are some things that are blind spots. And sometimes it's because of the hurt that comes with talking about difficult issues. And so the concept of tainted heart, right? That didn't go back to the 19th century. I think I just made that up. I didn't find anything when I Googled it, right? So the concept of the tainted heart is basically that all of us have been tainted in some way. In talking about issues of diversity, your first love, second, third, fourth, I don't know, right? So we've all had those experiences where we don't want to go back there. We don't want to talk about this again. We don't want to introduce this topic because the conflict that arises is so heavy. But I want to direct you to this concept of emotional intelligence. But before we do that, I'm going to ask for your participation again. So the first logo, Burger King. What is the slogan? Have it your way, right? And let's all say it out loud. The next one, underneath Burger King, M&M's. What's the slogan? Melts in your mouth, not in your hand. Have you all seen the new commercial with Danny? Is it Danny DeVito? It's hilarious. You should Google it. The next one, Nike. Just do it. Bounty. The quicker picker-upper. Now, why do you know these slogans? They have been given to you, right? They've been given to you probably since you were a child. I know at least since I was a child. And so I want you all to think about that and keep the concept of emotional intelligence close to that point. So when we think about emotional intelligence, there are 4 areas, 4 domains: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. But I want to talk about 4 areas specifically. We're going to start with emotional self-control. There are some times, like the example I gave you in watching the video of the moonwalking bear, I was upset. I was upset because I didn't get it. And sometimes we walk into a classroom, we walk into a social setting, and we may not have all of our emotions intact. The election is a perfect example, right? When President Donald Trump was elected, schools across the nation, I think, went to the internet. How can we talk about this in the classroom? How can we open up an opportunity to have conversation about the division that we're seeing? And some people said, well, how can we have a conversation, not about the division, but about people coming together? But people were really, I believe, in my experience and the phone calls that I received, people were really trying to figure out how to have this conversation. And the figuring out is because we've been socialized not to talk about what? Politics. We've been socialized not to talk about it at home, even with friends, right? Especially in mixed company. And so with that, because we've been socialized not to, we as a society have not built up the emotional capacity, the emotional intelligence to really open up conversation and dialogue about difficult topics. And so empathy, that brings me to the same conversation. How can you have a conversation about a political view different from yours if you have no empathy for the person that's in front of you? There's a difference between having a conversation and a debate and actually going into deep dialogue. Deep dialogue requires people to have empathy for one another. If I care about you and if I care about your view, because it's coming from you, then I'm listening differently. As we say here, we're listening to the third power, right? And so creating a better sense of empathy really helps that social awareness because we're understanding things that we didn't know before, and we're able to communicate with people that are different from us. Conflict management, I think, is fun. I love conflict because conflict really brings up the opportunity to transform. Without conflict, I believe we're staying in the same mundane place. Without conflict, we're not understanding what has happened before our time. We're not unpacking history, and we're not moving toward action. And conflict, I believe, the majority of conflict can be positive if we look at it as us practicing our muscle memory and having conversations and then moving toward innovation so that we get our schools to a better place. And then lastly, emotional self-awareness. What is it about you that you may not even understand that's getting in the way of progress and success in your classroom? How can you be in a place to learn more about yourself? Well, part of it is getting in a room with people that are different from you and not just going through the motions. Raise your hand if you've been to a networking event, maybe this one, and you feel like you're just going through the motions. Going through the motions means, hey, how are you? What do you do? Hey, how are you? Where are you from? Right? But how can we go into deeper conversation and revolutionize now? There's an opportunity that I present in saying it's time for us in creating social change to get beyond the, hey, how are you? What do you do? Because we are so much more than that as humans. And so how can we get to our passion? Try asking people, what's your passion? If you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And yeah, it might seem weird when you first ask a stranger that, but I guarantee you'll go into a deeper conversation And then empathy will increase, your level of empathy, and then your emotional intelligence will increase as well. All right, we're gonna play another game. I want you to say out loud the colors that you see on the screen per line. So every line, there'll be a different color. Are you ready? It's gonna go fast. All right, here we go. And you have to say it out loud. You have to shout it out loud or it won't work. Green,
Brown, yellow, red, blue. Blue, green, brown, yellow, red. Yellow, red, brown, blue, green. Red, green, yellow, blue, yellow, brown. Green, brown, yellow, red.
what happened? Some people didn't have their coffee this morning. So I actually went to a conference probably 8 years ago. John A. Powell, he spells his name with a small J, small A, small P. John A. Powell is known for implicit bias work or unconscious bias work. And he showed this slide and I said, I gotta use it, right? Because once again, I was tricked and I was upset. I need to figure out what was happening. 90% of what we do on a regular basis is unconscious. About 10% is conscious. Some people say 80-20, right? More research is showing that it's 90-10. And so if we think about those icons, those logos, we knew those slogans, right? Just like that. And when we're reading out the colors as it correlates to the letters, we're all well educated in this room. We shouldn't have a problem doing it. So what's happening? Our unconscious is kicking in. One more game. Just want to make sure you're up. One more game. I want you all to draw these dots. And I'm going to give you 45 seconds, maybe a minute if I see some smiles. Draw these dots on a scrap sheet of paper and then connect all of the dots using only 4 straight lines without lifting your pen. How many of you figured it out? Yeah? So here are some of the answers. You have to go outside of but where's the box? We think of it as a boundary. So how many boundaries are holding us back from doing this activity? How many boundaries are holding us back in the classroom? If you've seen this, some people have seen this, they've done it before, they've gotten it, and then they try it again and lose it. No, a few people here, knowing that you have to go outside the box. So did the two of you know you had to go outside the box, but you just couldn't remember how, right? And that's a part of the conversation, right? When we're talking about empathy, when we're talking about character development, and we're talking about diversity, all of those things are swirling, I would say, in the same soup. And we have to figure out those pieces that are missing. And it really starts with us and how we think about who we are and where we come from. So earliest messages. Think about your earliest messages as a child, not your memory, but your earliest messages. Think about your earliest messages, specifically about poor people. What were your earliest messages about poor people? Actively think about your earliest messages about people who are rich. What were those messages? Think about your earliest messages about Republicans. What were those messages? Think about your earliest messages of Democrats. What were those messages that were given to you as a child? Think about your earliest messages about people who wear glasses. What about earliest messages that pertain to people with any type of disability or difference, whether it's physical difference or intellectual difference? What were those messages? Diversity. So we're all diverse now. The United States is diverse. The world is diverse. Greensboro Day School is diverse. And so I think that everyone understands the concept of diversity. Different people, different thought processes, different backgrounds, different experiences coming together. And then there's equity. Equity is a bit different than diversity. People term equity different depending on where you're from and how you talk about it. I'm on a board and we're working through our mission and we're talking about diversity, and someone put the word out around equity. One person says, yes, I love that word. It means that everyone in our society has a say in how our organization supports them. And then someone else says, well, equity is about us providing equal access. And so that brought up a conversation, right? And then there's inclusion. Inclusion is an opportunity for everyone not only to come together, but be a part of actually deciding, what do we do? How am I going to benefit? Or what's in the way of me benefiting and having a voice in that? And then there's a sense of belonging. John A. Powell, once again, as you can tell, I like him as a scholar. He wrote a book recently, and he's talking about race and how to eradicate racism. And part of that is creating a sense of belonging within communities. How can you create a sense of belonging where everyone has access to success and everyone is included, but a sense of belonging is a feeling and where you're always thinking about how to not only make people feel included, but to make people feel like they have a say in how the long-term process is moving on a continual basis and not a one-stop shop. And then there's care. So with Social Designs, which is the company that I founded, one of our major 4 C's, one of the 4 is care. We believe it's extremely important to care for people, to meet them where they are, to understand the culture of where we're swimming, right? And to understand the culture that doesn't exist. There are multiple cultures in every single organization. So how can we take the time to dissect each and every one of those cultures to provide an opportunity where everyone feels included and everyone feels as if they belong? And you'll see that there are highlighted words around there. So there's fairness and responsibility. So if we were to translate into character and ethics vernacular, responsibility and fairness goes right along with equity. So creating an opportunity where everyone has access, where everyone is treated fairly. Equity means that everyone is treated fairly and that some people may be treated differently based on where they are socially, okay? And we all have a responsibility to do that. And then with citizenship in the meaning that we're all citizens of our organizations, right? So as of now, we're all citizens of this conference. And how can we make sure that everyone has a say in what happens maybe at the next conference? Typically, we have evaluations, right? That's a plug to do your evaluations. And so thinking about how we can really engage in the conversation around citizenship, not the conversation that's politicized right now, but more so how to make sure every single person is connected to an organization and has a voice. And so diversity, it's either difficult, I think, now in our society. It's either difficult where people don't want to talk about it. Oh no, not diversity. Or people want to celebrate it. And sometimes it's both at the same time. It's interesting. It's very interesting. People love diversity, but when we talk about equity, when we talk about lack of diversity or lack of inclusion, it begins to be difficult. Why? Because we haven't taken the time to get to know people. We haven't taken the time to empathize with different viewpoints. And so I wanted to share a few points around how to care. So how can we care more intently within our schools? The first thing is observing what's missing. Take a look around this room right now. Take a look around. And as you're looking, I want you to ask yourself, what's missing? What's missing and who's missing? Think about it from an access perspective. I see slanted, right? A slanted floor. So there's access. I see a space here, right? That has the emblem from someone who may be in a handicap, someone that may be handicapped. But I also don't see railings around the room. That's just something I notice, right? If I look around the room, I notice that there are a lot more women than men. So when you go into a room, specifically in your organization, what is missing? And then find out how you can pull in people to have those conversations that may represent or know about that piece that's missing, right? Secondly, leave your comfort zone. Leave your comfort zone, throw it away, come back to it when you need to, but leave your comfort zone because that's when we learn the most. That's when I've learned the most. I was recently speaking to a group of executives yesterday about a program that some people have been a part of here at Greensboro Day School called Other Voices, which is an opportunity for people, professionals, to get together for 8 months with strangers. Ooh, once a month, and to talk about issues of diversity, to talk about sexism, to talk about racism, talk about ableism, lookism, socioeconomic status, classism, and to do that in a circle where you have no other choice but to talk to each other. Even though I've been in diversity for a while, that was definitely out of my comfort zone. One, because I don't like sitting down and looking at people for a whole day. Like, I need to get up, move around, something, right? So the facilitation in itself was out of my comfort zone, but I gained so much from the experience. I also recently, well, 5 years is recent, began to study, what does it mean to go green? What does it mean to really work with communities and talk about sustainability? Not only sustainability in energy, but also sustainability in culture and how to connect the two, right? And those opportunities have given me so much insight and so much growth. And I've been open to a completely different new group of people. Also, developing an inquisitive mindset. When you see something that's wrong in your classroom or within your organization, how often do you point out what's wrong compared to coming with a solution? I know I've been in situations where I am definitely letting you know what's wrong. This is wrong, and I think we need to think about, how the organization needs to do a better job at X, Y, Z. And these students, I come from a collegiate background, these students aren't feeling supported, and this faculty group, blah, 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 right? And so I realized that I was not bringing enough solutions to the table. When you don't bring enough solutions to the table, when you don't have an inquisitive mindset, people stop listening. Do you have friends or family members that complain all the time and never do, and it sounds like this in your head, right? And they never do anything about it or never come to you with a solution? Sometimes you may be doing that in your organization. Sometimes you may be doing that in your classrooms. And so I encourage you to have an inquisitive mindset. An inquisitive mindset, it lets the person that you're talking to or the organizational leaders that you're speaking with, it lets them know that you actually care. You care about the mission. You care about the organization, and you want to be a part of the solution. There's nothing wrong with talking about what's wrong, but having a solution with that, or at least opening up an opportunity to hear more, really, really helps in that process. And then partnering with other schools. So this is an independent school group of folk, as we say in North Carolina, folk a lot. North Carolina Folk Festival is great. It's coming September 7th, by the way. That was a side note. Independent schools. How often do you go outside of your network to talk to other schools about maybe what you're missing? Or sharing with other schools about things that you've realized that's helpful for your students? Are there partnerships that happen across county lines, within county lines? But that same project I was telling you about earlier, the Youth Action Project, we were in Arizona, it was New Mexico. We were in New Mexico about 6 years ago, and there was an independent school, a private middle school, who wanted to come to our conference. And they had been talking about social justice the entire semester. And they wanted to partner with another group who were in a low-income area in the city to actually bring resources to that group, gain learning from the group, and create community. And they all came to the conference together because they wanted to start the conversation before the conference, engage in leadership development for their students during the conference, and then afterwards begin to go across the lines that have been set. The lines that we saw around the dots, right? We set those up for ourselves. And sometimes our organizations are set up in that way because of the history that goes along with how our country has been developed, okay? So think about how you can partner with schools outside of your network. That will also help in developing that empathy and developing that care. Finding common language. How many of you have been in a conversation and you can tell that you and the other person are talking about the same thing, but you're using different language? Anyone in the room? It happens so much. And so many times people are talking across each other and really not listening. And so when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we think about character, I think it's really important for us to find common language within those two pedagogies. So I want to introduce something to you all. Some of you may have seen it. This may be new to others. So the cycle of liberation. This is a cycle that I learned about in college, and also taught it to a few classes on the collegiate level. And one of the organizations that I've worked with, they've actually brought the cycle of liberation into their organization for an entire 3-year-long process. And in that cycle of liberation, there are very specific points that I think are important to note. And these points also connect directly with character. And so these areas include reaching out. Reaching out is pretty much taking the opportunity to find out who's in your community, who's in your network, and figuring out ways to develop that interpersonal relationship. And then there's building community. So in that reaching out, really going the extra mile and building community with people who may be in your organization or outside of your organization. Building community, it looks like working with others, people like us for support, whatever that means to you, as well as people different from us, and building coalitions. Questioning assumptions. So there's a dialogue process that we are using here at Greensboro Day School. We're walking through different dialogue principles. And one of those principles is actually checking for assumptions and checking for biases. And then also coalescing. How can we actually bring people together, right? How can we organize? This has been an amazing organizing effort to bring people together that want to engage in this type of conversation. So how can we make that more powerful? Creating change. Creating change, it starts with being innovative. What is it that's missing? And then what can we add to the pot? What can we take out to make sure that it's fruitful for everyone? Or hearty if it's in the pot, right? So influencing policy. So we're in education. How often do you all think about education policy? And not only how it affects you and your school and your community, but education, the education industry as a whole. And then also assumptions, structures, definitions. Assumptions and structures, every single organization presents a structure. Every single industry presents a structure. So what are you all doing to unpack that, to really understand how all of those pieces go together? And when I say pieces, for example, how does the education policy connect directly with policy within the medical field? How do policies within the medical field connect directly to the judicial industry, right? So really understanding that as leaders is extremely important. And then maintaining. Raise your hand if you've been through a diversity initiative, campaign, going through one, ever. In your current organization, keep your hands up if it just kind of stopped or if it waved a little bit, right? So part of creating change and keeping change going is maintaining it. How can you integrate? We're going to talk about integration next. How can you integrate what's already happening within the culture of your organization so that diversity is a part of it? Equity and inclusion is a part of it. And then getting ready. Getting ready means that you're constantly talking about and thinking about getting outside of your comfort zone. You're constantly working toward improving yourself. Getting ready is a constant. It doesn't just happen, right? Getting ready, in my opinion. I don't know if you all ever heard the phrase, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Yes. Mm-hmm. Waking up, that's the opportunity to actually be exposed to different learning, different ways of thinking. And that is has a lot to do with interpersonal skills and really taking the time to find your blind spots. It's hard because if they're blind, how can you find them, right? But being around people who are not like you, being around people who don't think like you really helps with their process. And speaking of waking up, there is an author that's coming to Greensboro in September by the name of Debbie Irving. And she has a great book called Waking Up White. And she's a good friend of mine. Now, I remember having a conversation with her. I said, how did you come up with that title? And she said, well, one day I just woke up and I realized I was white. I said, well, I always knew I was black. But that's another conversation. So here are the connections. And I'll give you a second to take a look at how the principles, the 6 pillars of character, actually connect to the cycle of liberation. So if we were to translate that language, this is how it would translate. Fairness connects with reaching out. Trustworthiness connects to coalescing and building community. Responsibility connects with change, creating change, as well as maintaining it. Respect, maintaining. Citizenship, getting ready and waking up. So this is just a quick snap at ways that you can actually create a culture of character and ethics, and pair it with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the cycle of liberation is just one tool to engage in when having these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Changing the narratives. So this picture points out some of the areas that I spoke to earlier when I asked you to think about those early messages that you've had about different types of people. And we could have went on and on and on. That actually could have been an interactive activity in itself. What are your thoughts about religion, about sexuality, income, sexual orientation, mental ability, age, marital status, gender, upbringing, physical ability, education, culture, ethnicity, seniority? What do those things mean for you? What do they mean for you in your organization? What do they mean for you with your family, with your friends? All of these things mean something to each of us in different ways, and we bring that into an organization. Organizations also have their own culture that tell us what to think about these things. Even though many organizations will say, no, we're open, we're diverse, we're inclusive, we want everyone to tell us what they think, most times the machine of the organization is perpetuating itself so beautifully that we're not even realizing how much of that organizational culture is pushing up against or conflicting with other people's culture. And when that's addressed, is there a conversation? Is there dialogue? Or is there a debate? Some organizational components cannot be changed, right? Well, actually, I think anything can be changed. But some things, it takes a while, right? It takes transformation, it takes time. And, they're pillars, right? We don't want students to come to school and not learn those things, right? We want those to stay true. But what are the things in our organization, from language, how we speak to each other, how we communicate, what's been valued? When I send you an email, do you respond with a phone call? When I send you an email about a certain topic, do you respond with a phone call? When I write an extensive email, do you write an extensive email back? So what's valued in the organization? How are decisions being made? These are questions for you all to think about. And so with the work that we do with social designs, one thing that we work people through is a concept of equity and inclusion 101. And we take them through a process of really unpacking their culture. So if you were to list different things within organizational culture, from language, communication, hierarchy, list how they are valued, right? Answer those questions. How are these pieces of our organization valued? And then the next question is, how can they be more valued? Or how can they be more inclusive? So how to care with more depth? I really do believe that caring, it is so important to include more diversity, equity, and inclusion, to increase more empathy within your organization. There have been so many times where the body language of someone has given off to me that they don't care, even if their words are telling me differently, right? And so there's a phrase that I heard a few years back by Hector McCahern, who's a diversity consultant. And he said, impact and intent are completely two different things. And so even though you may have good intentions as educators, the impact of your actions speak volumes. And so what is your actual impact, right? And thinking about it is very, very, very important. And that's why I think that caring for people, genuinely caring for people, no matter if you completely disagree with their upbringing, or you may disagree with all of their political views, do you really care enough to have a conversation? And I know that is the most powerful thing that we've been able to do with social designs, is really helping people to understand that piece of care. So checking your call log. I talked earlier about getting outside of your comfort zone. If you were to check your call log, and I ask people this all the time, what do the people look like? Your last 5, let's say 10. What do they look like? What do they believe in? From a spiritual or religious perspective, from a political perspective, from a pedagogical perspective, what do they believe in? Where do they live, right? And how much of that is similar to you? And I get it. We grow up in a certain way, right? Most of the reason why our country is so segregated in different areas is because we don't live together. And so that happens. But how can you change your call log? How can you change who comes over to your home to actually have dinner with you, right? And not just having that one blank friend. I had to check myself. That program I told you about, Other Voices, at the end of Other Voices, I looked around the circle and I said, wow, this group is absolutely amazing. And I've gained just powerful relationships that have changed my viewpoint, that have changed my perspective. And I want my life to look more like this. And I've been on that journey ever since. And also forgiving and restoring. We talked a couple of weeks here ago about the concept of empathy, but aligning that to restorative justice. Part of moving forward, right, in your classroom, within your organization, is learning how to forgive and to restore. We don't have time to go into restorative justice, but that's a really, really cool concept, as well as structure, as well as best practice to follow if your organization is ready, or even in relationships that you have with your friends, right? How can you forgive and restore? Putting this knowledge into action. One thing I'll leave you with is actually aligning your intentions and your expectations with those who are a part of your team, those who are part of your unit. What are your intentions and expectations of each other? And aligning on that doesn't mean that you are agreeing, right? Everyone doesn't have the same intentions or the same expectations, but the first step is having enough care and empathy for each other to have the conversation. So maybe your intention this morning was for me to give you a bunch of stats, I don't know, or to talk more about educational culture, or to, I don't know, what your intention may be. Hopefully I've met your expectation, right? And my intention was to share a little bit of the things that I've done and ways in which we can come together. But having that conversation, right? Had that conversation with Michelle in planning for this day and understanding the culture of who would be here. That's very, very important. It's also important for you to do that within your organization and within your units, not just in the beginning of the school year, not just in the beginning of a new semester, but finding a way to do that as necessary. I would say at least once a month, because your intentions and expectations may change based on how your worldview changes, and being open to that, being flexible, I think is one of the best qualities of an educator is being flexible. Because the school, even though the school isn't in society, society is changing around us all the time. And being flexible is very important in that. And so as I close, I invite you all to create an environment of truth. What does truth look like in your organization? Are you in meetings and you're holding your tongue because you don't want to engage in conflict? Are you in relationships with people on your team or your leadership team and you don't want to talk about those things that folks get heated around, right? We have visceral reactions sometimes to topics. Bring your truth in a way in which you're practicing that emotional intelligence. You're understanding how to bring your truth in a respectful way and being open to listening to what the feedback will be. And lastly, celebrating the growth of your mind and your heart. Our minds are being filtered all the time. It's doing it right now, right? If you're like me, you might like to doodle while you're listening to speakers or in classrooms. And so part of that filter may be listen to the speaker, right? And we all have hearts that have been tainted. So I encourage you to live in that, to celebrate that, because that's what makes us human. Being perfect doesn't make us human. Being open to making mistakes, chewing on those mistakes and moving forward, that's what makes us very, very engaged humans. And in doing so, we're providing an opportunity by showing that example to our students. Thank you.